I want to say thank you to Deacon Roland Smith, who gave us the word last week on the first Sunday of Advent, and then the week before that, Deacon Michelle Fox Phillips and Jared Peterson, who also talked about Trans Day of Remembrance. During that time, I was away. Many of you know that I traveled to Israel and Palestine for a spectacular tour with LGBT clergy, both rabbis and pastors, and one bishop. You'll see her in a moment. And we were there to really have this conversation about creating peace within our midst. So when you think about, is peace possible, especially when you've had people who've been in conflict, and in their case, centuries, is peace really possible? This morning, what I would like to do is to talk about God's response to when there is conflict in the absence of peace. That peace is indeed possible when the conflict is interrupted with love. That we are never more like God as when we show love towards others, especially those who we are in conflict with. It's with that I invite you to bow your hearts in a word of opening prayer. In this season of love and joy and peace, God, we need it so desperately in our hearts, in our homes, in our community, and especially in our world. We pray that you would continue to disrupt and interrupt those ways that we want to be selfish and isolate ourselves. Help us to find others in meaningful ways, to be kind, compassionate, to be reflections of our living and loving God. So God, we pray that we would be transformed as a result of hearing your word this morning. In your blessed name we pray. Amen. We are never more like God than when we show love towards others, especially towards those who we may be in conflict with. We recognize that at this time of the year, the holidays can bring up a whole variety of emotions. Many of us are so looking forward to being reunited with family we haven't seen in a while, exchanging those gifts, having a great meal, or just even participating in those holiday traditions that just simply make our hearts warm. But we would be remiss if we recognize that is not everyone's experience of this time of the year. That many of us who are here in this very room are not looking forward to the upcoming weeks, because it's a reminder of a lost one who's no longer with us, and that pain is so great that we don't know what to do with it. Or we may be in conflict with a relative, maybe even a parent or a sibling, and we just don't know the words to use to try to build a bridge to create peace and harmony. But God has a remedy for that. Because in the era in which Jesus was born, God interrupted the conflict of the world during that time to bring a message of hope and of joy and of peace through love. If you know anything about the actual trajectory of history, that we like to think that Jesus was born on year one, that that's when we begin the calendar. But scholars really like to believe that it was more so closer to the year 4 BC. What was happening in the world in the year 4 BC? If you've been to Sunday school, if you've been to church for a lot of parts, many years of your life, you may be familiar with the name of King Herod the Great. King Herod was one of the rulers during Judea at the time when Jesus was born. And boy, was the world in conflict. We think our world is messed up today. It was nothing like it was in the times of Herod. Herod, although is remembered for a lot of great things that he did, in fact, he was a great architectural person. In fact, he was responsible for the rebuilding of the Jewish temple and putting the walls back together. That was one of the things that I was able to see during my time over in the Holy Land. That even still today, the walls that King Herod built are still standing. And so he was revered by a lot of people, but King Herod suffered. He suffered from paranoia. And although he had a lot of great power and command, that he feared that someone was going to steal his throne. And so he murdered. He's known for murdering his own son. But he didn't stop there. That anyone he felt was going to be an heir to the throne or a claim to the throne, he would have them murdered. So there was nothing but chaos and pandemonium. People are at each other's throats. And it's during this type of season that God wanted to interrupt that conflict and interrupt that chaos with a message of love. The Isaiah passage that we read today, that we heard today, talked about from the root of Jesse would come this righteous branch. What does that mean? That Jesse was an individual who lived in the era of Judea, and according to his lineage, that he was part of the lineage of Abraham. That Abraham got such and such and such and such and such and such, got down to Jesse, who then had 7 sons, the youngest of whom was named David. David became the second king of Israel. And it's through that line of David came Jesus Christ. So you can go all the way back going backwards from Jesus to David, David to Abraham. This righteous, holy line. And so when Jesus was born and Jesus came into the world and he was preaching and teaching his message, one of the religious leaders, because it wasn't cool to be with Jesus, but he came to Jesus in the dark of night and said, no one can do what you're doing unless you're from God. This religious leader is giving Jesus credit, saying, you must be the one we've been waiting for, our long-awaited Messiah. Isaiah basically said that from the root of Jesse will come your Messiah. And Nicodemus was affirming, you must be the one. Because who else can do the things that you do? And yes, we can focus on all the various miracles and all the wonderful words that Jesus has said. But if you take a look at the words and the deeds of Jesus, it was all bound up, as we read in John 3:16. For God so loved the world that God gave the one and only Son. Through words and deeds was love. It was God's way of interrupting the chaos, interrupting the conflict. so that you and I, women and men, children, can see a better way of being with one another. That we don't have to get lost in the conflicts that rise up in our own hearts or in our own world. That we have the power of interruption with love. How do you do that, though? How do you love someone who you are in conflict with? One of the places that we got to visit, that I was honored to visit, was by the Sea of Galilee. And on the mountainside is where Jesus gave one of his most famous sermons. In fact, it was the longest sermon, called the Beatitudes. And it was in that sermon Jesus gave his listeners, and thus gives to each and every one of us, a practical way of interrupting conflict, interrupting chaos. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the realm of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people revile you, or persecute you, or say all other kinds of evils against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. In other words, God gives vision to those who have a heart and a mind for God to see a better way of life. That when you have all types of chaos around you, you can see through that chaos to see something better. And that God gives you the right words and the right deeds wrapped in love to offer to someone else. Imagine how it feels when you were the person who did something wrong, and the person came and they forgave you. You didn't ask for the forgiveness, but you were given forgiveness nonetheless. What impact does that have on your life? To say, we were at odds, and now we're at peace. Why does that happen? Why would someone be motivated? It's because people have the love of God from God and then show it outward. Love makes the difference. And that we are never more like God than when we show love. Amen. Especially towards those who we're in conflict with. As I mentioned, during my time in Israel and Palestine, I was blessed, I was fortunate to be with other colleagues who were LGBT identified. And so that was a really unique opportunity, because not only did we go to all of the historical sites, but we got to listen to people who interrupt conflict in their lives through love. And we think we live with conflict. You should see some of the conditions that those who live in Israel and Palestine have to endure. Let me give you an example of some of the animosity. In between today and my trip to Israel, I was in Washington, D.C. And I caught a cab from the Capitol Hill going back to my hotel. And the cab driver had a little Palestinian flag hanging from his mirror. I said, oh, I was just in Palestine. He said, well, what were you doing there? Oh, we were there and we were talking about peace and how peace is possible. His response to me was, there's only one way to have peace. Get rid of all the Jews. I had heard that type of sentiment while I was over there. Because not only did I hear that from the Palestinian side, I also heard it from the Israeli side. Now you know about the Sea of Galilee and the Jordan River, and you know about the Mediterranean Sea. There's a saying that from the river, Jordan River, from the river to the sea, Palestine shall be free. Or from the river to the sea, Israel shall be free. In other words, eradicate everybody in that land who's not like you. That is the type of conflict we're talking about. And in the next couple of weeks, I'll go into a little bit greater detail about that conflict. But this morning, I want to talk to you about those who try to interrupt that level of centuries of conflict. And those are some individuals from the LGBTQ community. In fact, as we met with them, they said, oh, we don't use LGBTQ anymore. That's old. What we use here in Israel is we are the proud community. I said, oh, well, say more. They said, because when you start listing all the different alphabets, you're going to eventually miss somebody. And then you're going to alienate those allies who don't necessarily fit into those letters. So we've come up with, we're the proud community. And that encompasses everybody. Because we are proud of who we are. We're proud of our neighbors. We're proud of our family members. We're just proud. And that is the umbrella term in which we use. I said, well, amen to that. Let's go to the next slide, please. And so here are some of the individuals who helped make this opportunity possible. There's a group called the Wider Bridge. And the gentleman with the shorts on is the executive director of this group. How did I get invited? How did I get to be so lucky? It's the two individuals in the middle. The taller gentleman is MCC minister. Many of you may know him as Reverend Dr. Neil Thomas. He was the pastor of the Founders MCC, the one in Los Angeles. He's now the pastor of Cathedral of Hope in Dallas, the UCC church. And next to him is a dear friend of ours, Rabbi Denise Ager. And the two of them and myself, we did a lot of work around marriage equality. And then the other gentleman was our tour guide, and who's openly gay. And we were grateful that the people who organized this, we had gay bus drivers, we had gay tour guides, we had gay, just everything. Just restaurants we went to were LGBT friendly in Tel Aviv. However, if you take a little bit closer, for some of you guys in the back may not be able to see this, but there's a little sign that says LGBTQ Clergy Mission. That's the bus we rode throughout until we got to Palestine. We had to get off that bus. We couldn't have Jewish drivers. Each of us had name badges, had a little rainbow bridge on it. We had to take those off. My friends who were rabbis had to remove their yarmulkes. And then we went into Palestine to have conversations with people around this. Let's go to the next slide, please. This is the outside of the LGBTQ Center in Tel Aviv. And if you know anything about Tel Aviv, it is the San Francisco or the New York of Israel. That if you are LGBT identified, you find your way to Tel Aviv. Because there are protections and you can be safe and you can live out and proud the way you want to. In fact, there's a huge conflict, going back to that word, between Jerusalem, which is more religious bound, and Tel Aviv, which is more secular bound. But it is there that they're doing some incredible work for LGBT, or the proud community, as they say. Next slide. Shin Areli is the deputy mayor of Tel Aviv, and she is out and proud, and she is the CEO of Agunda. Agunda is the LGBT task force for Israel. We have one here in the United States. So she's the CEO of the task force for LGBT concerns in Tel Aviv and in politics, the deputy mayor. So she is doing some spectacular things, and she let us know about some great things of being advocates for several people. During her visit to us, we got to meet transgender activists in Tel Aviv. We got to meet a gentleman who's working with businesses. It's called LGBT Tech, and doing some work around them. Those working with youth and so forth. Last slide. And then this is my new friend, I call her, Mary Glasspool. Many of you may have heard of Eugene Robinson from the Episcopal Church in the diocese, and the diocese there. Mary Glasspool is the second out lesbian elected in the Episcopal Church, and she's in the New York area. And so she was the only bishop we had on her trip. But listening to her about how she has done so much interruption of conflict and of stereotypes, not only for women clergy, but also, again, helping change the face of the Episcopal Church. These are examples of individuals who have a vision. In the midst of conflict, they can either get into a place, well, this is me and this is us, or this is me and them, and retreat to their own corners and continue to shoot bullets, sometimes literal bullets, but sometimes figuratively, using your words to shoot and kill people with your words or literal. You can do that. Or you can have the vision through the lens of love to see that you're still my brother. You're still my sister. And that we are together in this. And that we are better people when we live in peace and in harmony. What's the motivation? The motivation is that our hearts have been changed by love. You can go to the next slide, please. I want to conclude by just simply saying that as we are heading into our holiday season, whether we are looking forward to it or whether we just can't wait till it's over, each of us have a responsibility to see each other in our full humanity. Regardless if we've been in conflict with one another, whether they're a family member or a stranger, whether they voted Democrat or Republican, whether they're for an impeachment or not, we still owe it to us. Yes, and I'm sorry, I forgot there was another slide. And this is the entire group of individuals, of rabbis and pastors. You can leave it up. We owe it to one another to see our humanity and to recognize that it's because of love that I need that gives strength to my heart. And that we are never more like the God who we claim we serve and we claim we follow. We're never more like God as when we love each other. We interrupt the conflict. We interrupt the chaos. And even though we may not receive that love back, God's love is so great and massive that it fills us up. And we rely upon God as opposed to whether we're going to receive something back from someone else. This is the message of the season. This is the practical application of why we do what we do. We give because we love. We show up because we care. We interrupt because we don't want to see conflict to continue on. It is my hope for all of us as a community, a proud community, to continue to interrupt with love. In Jesus' name, amen.